Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending today. This is the introduction to an IPS fidelity review, and the intent of this is to kind of share as a group what it is that will be doing within the fidelity review for any agencies that are going to be part of an upcoming fidelity review. This is something new. We've not tried it before, so we would love to have a critique after we're done related to how it worked and if it was effective for you. So keep that in mind, and if you'd be willing to share just by email with either Darren or I or Austin when we're done, if you felt like it was an effective use of time in order to prepare you for the fidelity review, we'd love to hear that information. And today we have with us Austin, awesome Austin, who supports our team, does an amazing job of it, I have to say. Darren, who is the other Supported Employment Program Manager and Trainer for the west side of the state, and then I'm Dawn, the Supported Employment Program Manager and Trainer for the east side of the state. Darren and I will take turns presenting slides and information as we go. So what we're going to do is, if you would please use the chat box to sign in with your name and the agency you represent. Sometimes the your email address doesn't necessarily represent what agency you're from. So if you could use the chat box in order to sign in with your name and your agency, that would help. Also use the chat box to put in questions or things that you're hoping to learn today. We are going to address questions as we go if they kind of fit in with the slide that we're looking at, and then maybe at the end if they don't fit in with the slide that we're on at the current moment. So make good use of the chat box. For anybody that's not familiar with the platform, the chat box, at least on my screen, is the bottom of the series of links, if you will. And if you just click on the little triangle, it will open up the chat box so that you can use that and type in a comment. And then you have a choice of sending it to the whole group or just to the presenters. So the other thing that you can do, and I see it looks like we already have a couple of questions. You can raise a hand if you want to ask a question verbally. At some point in time, what we're going to everybody. Awfully nice to see you. And then I am going to turn it over on the next slide to Darren.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for this breakout session to get familiar with how we conduct an IPS fidelity view and some of the things that go into it. I think this is the most important messaging that we want to be able to provide to everybody, that this is a learning opportunity. I came on board back in March. I worked closely with Dawn, still work very closely with Dawn and Lisa Bennett-Perry before me in terms of learning this role. So the only way you really, from my perspective, get used to this process is being part of a fidelity review. And I know many of you will be joining Dawn and myself in reviews for this year. So because of the restrictions of COVID and safety, the reviews are virtual this year to respect the safety of everybody and the clients and job seekers we serve. There is no financial ties to this. Definitely we provide incentives, the HCA does, for your participating in this process, but we are not looking for things to entrap anybody, no gotcha moments. We just really want to see the services that you're doing. And as many of the agencies are brand new to this, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of investment and a lot of energy and staff to make this happen. And we know people start small, and with success, programs build. So definitely it's a cooperative program between all of us, and the use of individual technical assistance if needed, or just joining us on many of the trainings that the HCA provides throughout the year. So thank you for being here.
And there's a delay in advancing slides, of course. One of the things that Darren and I were kind of laughing about as we were getting started is one of the slides talks about using a virtual platform and some of what that means. And some of what that means is there are glitches. And so hopefully today will go smoothly related to technology. I hope I haven't just jinxed it. But what I know, huh? What I also know is that Darren and Austin will take over if for some reason my screen goes away for the moment, because it could have bad Wi-Fi. And I appreciate your patience and tolerance, and I know we've been through it lots of other times and lots of other webinars, so cross your fingers. So IPS fidelity reviews, for those of you that are brand new to it, are set up a series of activities and also interviews in a fidelity review. And I think what I'm going to try and do, let's see if I can do this the way that I'm hoping to. I'm hoping that you can see on your screen a sample letter regarding preparation for the fidelity visit. Is that something, Darren and Austin, you can see it? Okay.
Yeah.
So anybody that's going to have a fidelity review will have a letter that looks similar to this. This is actually out of the manual, the Fidelity Reviewer Manual, which is one of the handouts that you can download. If you see on the screen on your right, the dashboard, it says handouts 205. The manual is one of the handouts that you can download at this point in time. And in it, one of the many, many things is an example letter. And this is a good example of a listing of the documents we're hoping to see, either prior to and or during the review, the interviews that we hope to have, that you will set up, and then the activities that you'll be involved in, or we will be involved in during the period of time that we're doing the review. So you can see that's a list of documents. Here's a list of activities. And we're going to talk in greater detail about those, but this letter is what you get in preparation so that you have the whole list of what it is that we're hoping to see. And then today we're going to continue discussing what each of those things looks like. So the fidelity review is conducted in the three main categories, which is review of data, which includes data on individuals. So it may be their care plan, hopefully it's their career or vocational profile, job search plans, job support plans, things along that line in regards to the individual data. Staff calendars to see, kind of where you spend your time. And when COVID is not restricting us, that time is intended to be 65% of the time out in the community. So that calendar, particularly when we're not under COVID restrictions, is going to show us how much time are you spending out in the community? Where are you spending your time? And then marketing materials. We hope to see brochures and things. One of the fidelity items talks about looking at the lobby, see if your lobby has brochures and things in it. And so we've started asking, because we cannot come to you, send a picture of your lobby to us. We would like to see if you have placement of supported employment brochures, the IPS program in brochures in your lobby, so that people can self-refer as well. We do a lot of individual and group interviews during the fidelity review, and we'll talk once again in greater detail about what those look like. And in regards to the chart review, and this has been one of the most challenging things to do in a virtual review. Obviously, for face-to-face, you sit us down with whatever chart you've got, whether it's electronic or paper, and you're there to point out, here's where this information is, here's where that information is. In the virtual review, you have to be able to get that information to us electronically. If you have an electronic health record, the best and safest way to do that is to grant us access to that temporary access to that health record. I know a lot of individuals and agencies have asked about confidentiality. The process is the same in person as it would be in person and electronically. Your contract with the HCA includes in it information about confidentiality and HIPAA and things along that line. Any of the reviewers that are other than HCA staff also sign a contract that has that same information in it. So failing that, if you don't have an electronic health record, and lots of folks don't, then the issue would be copying, scanning, that kind of thing, the documents that you would want to send to us, and then making certain they are sent in an encrypted format. If anything that contains protected health information has got to come to us in an encrypted format. We've seen agencies use Dropboxes. We've seen agencies allow us access to the electronic health record. We've seen agencies just email the information to us in an encrypted email. I mean, there have been a variety of things. The one that's the least glitchy and most likely to work is if you have the electronic health record, just allowing us access to that.
Hey, Don, this is Darren. I just wanted to add that agencies, we want you to provide that release of information with the review team so that we're all bound by the same, confidentiality as anybody else at the organization. Some agencies have been reluctant to share information. So if we need to coordinate with, your records information manager or IT, we're able to do that too. Whatever we can do to facilitate that smooth transfer of data is really going to be helpful for all of us. And it's also good for us to have a designated person to help us with the notes, definitely on the electronic health record system, to have somebody designated to kind of navigate us to where the information is, just to help us speed up with the time management process. Because when we do this virtually, things can tend to slow down a bit, and it can be really hard to get through all the information in the allotted time.
Yeah, and I think that's something we're going to cover again later on in the presentation too. Doesn't hurt to hear it twice or three times, because that's how we learn. We'd also say that some agencies have sent confidentiality statements. So if you typically have volunteers that come to your agency or student interns or things along that line, and you have a confidentiality statement that you use in that circumstance, feel free to send it to the reviewer team members, and we're happy to sign and send back to you. It really is whatever works for you. And we want to make sure that agencies feel confident that it's going to go the way that it should. I will say, from my personal standpoint, if information is sent to me, I frankly don't want to keep it. So as soon as the report is written, I delete kind of all that information. So from that standpoint, that's just another assurance that, and I don't print things. That would be that would be interesting. So from the standpoint of information being deleted, that's something that we also do.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Elke asked, is faxing the documents through HIPAA fax allowed?
The problem being, because we're doing things virtually, and typically there's a team of 3 or 4 people, you would have to fax the information to each person separately if they have the ability to receive a fax. And that's not necessarily going to be the case. So what we found is scanning and emailing has been, a viable alternative. I'm not sure that faxing would. As an example, I'm in Moses Lake, Darren's in Olympia. The Fidelity Review members that we have coming up in the next meeting, one is in one is in Olympia, one's in Yakima, I'm in Moses Lake. So, we don't have a central location to pick everything up from. So that's a part of the issue there. I hope that answers your question, Elke. I do see Holly had also said, with COVID, is there an understanding that job development logs and community time are greatly reduced? Absolutely. That, having said that, that doesn't mean that there's an expectation that anything less than there's still at least 6 employer contacts going on. It's just the way that you contact is different. So 6 per week is the standard. We would expect to see phone calls or Zoom calls or something along that line in your job develop block. And as far as the activities in the community, I know I saw that Spokane at least just moved to phase 2. I'm not sure which agencies are going to get to start seeing people at least part of the time face-to-face again. That's something we're trying to take into account too. Holly had asked, will only FCS clients be reviewed, or can any of our supported employment client charts be pulled for review and or interview? It does need to be FCS participants. If your other aspects of your supported employment program are also using IPS, that's great. But because our funding and things come through FCS and through the program related to that, we need to make sure that the clients' charts that we're reviewing are actually FCS participants. And I see Elke said yes, that answered the question. Good deal. All right.
Great
So
question.
Darren, on to you. You had very good questions.
So one of the most important parts of actually completing the virtual format is to be able to have a platform and the technology to complete the process. Our DBHR unit just transitioned over to MS Teams, which has been very helpful in terms of an opportunity to learn another platform and embrace the system. It hasn't been a smooth process, just because whenever you start a new system, it seems like there's things to work out. So we're kind of working some of those out, as we go along. Definitely, I've been able to be part of Zoom meetings, and that's been very smooth. Unfortunately, HCA does not have a license for Zoom, even though HCA provided a lot of licenses for agencies. We don't actually have that, but we can definitely conduct over Zoom. And the HCA is phasing out Skype, because I've also used Skype last year for some reviews, and I think that's fading out at the end of this month. So definitely there's some things that we can do to help facilitate that. We've had people just block out, 9 hours, and then people come and go out of the meeting rooms during their selected time. So that way we're not doing individual time slots for each individual interview or meeting. The other thing that's really personal experience, that there is some fatigue that builds up being in a virtual environment. So we do like to have breaks during the day so that we can just remove our eyes, from the screen and hopefully move around a little bit, plus lunch breaks there. So all these things, Dawn and I work with each individual provider to kind of look at the schedule of events and create some breaks. The other thing that I like to do kind of at the end of the day for the review team people that we might be all done doing the actual review is kind of just have a debrief time, just for the reviewers to kind of go over our notes. Maybe there's some other questions that I need to follow up with the reviewed agency to get some clarification. So it's definitely a very busy day, and I understand that things also come up where it might pull you away from the interviews. Just let us know. Many people are still working at agencies, and having worked at a behavioral health agency for decades, unforeseen things come up, and we can really work around. We just need to know, and people do run late. I've seen that too. Just let Dawn and I know what's happening. So particularly if reviewers have to leave the review team and address something and come back. So it's all about communication. And I think that's why Dawn and I set this up, is just to kind of start that conversation process and kind of go through some of the expectations and some of the lessons and things that we've learned by jumping into this format this year, just like all of us have, and being able to continue to provide quality work that we do. Apart from the interviews with different clinical providers, different staff and the executive team, we really like to have the job seekers as participants and connect with the family. Through the reviews, that's where we really kind of see where that client-centered planning and interaction can be very vibrant for agencies. And we understand that many participants may not have technology platforms to join in, so definitely even with COVID, people have been able to come into some conference rooms to be part of the interview, or that we can use phones and do some follow-up calls and have each individual reviewer be responsible for that. I've also done that somewhat with medical providers, just because their schedules don't always allow time for interviews, or coordinating and doing some follow-up with the Division of Vocational Rehab staff as well. So there's some flexibility, even though when Dawn was going through the schedule of events, it's very structured and very time orientated, but we can work together to kind of create some of that flexibility to make sure we're getting the information that we need, plus that you have the time to coordinate with everybody and make a workable schedule. So, because it's really hard developing, there's a lot of administrative time in doing these reviews. When I was a provider in King County, I know how many hours it takes to really get this set up and to kind of keep, you know, a smooth process once it gets going. So definitely communication is great, and if there's some challenges, Dawn and I are able to address those and work with you to get the information we need at the end of the day.
And in fact, happy to do so. And a couple of things that I just mentioned too, and you know, Darren's talking about our experiences. One is that if we have a series of interviews with staff, it's absolutely fine to set up one Zoom meeting for maybe, you know, 2 or 3 hours to do that kind of thing. What we have found for, and this is a HIPAA issue, when doing a scheduled interview with participants or family members, it's best if you can set those up singly. So for just the amount of time needed for that participant, so that they come in and go out and they don't end up accidentally getting into another meeting with maybe case managers where there's some protected health information that's shared about somebody that they don't need to hear about. So whereas it's good to do blocks of time for perhaps staff, probably not as much for participants and family members. And as Darren said, we will accommodate. If somebody is nervous about being in the group environment, because the participant interviews and the family interviews, we tend to do them in a group. And what we found face-to-face is they kind of support each other and make each other feel more comfortable. Some people are just not. So we can have a review team member split off and call people individually if they're not comfortable being part of the group interview setting. The other thing is, and just to make really clear, the only way that the review team could set up all the interviews is if you give us all the contact information for everybody. So the hosting agency is the one that's going to set up all the interviews and set up the Zoom meetings or whatever platform you're going to use and that kind of thing, with perhaps the exception of, you know, Darren mentioned we like to kind of debrief at the end of the day. We can do a meeting, you know, Darren and I can set those up. I know with chart review kinds of things, it's varied, at least in my experience, between whether I set it up for the reviewers and then share with a staff person from the agency, or whether the agency sets it up. So we will, as needed, talk about those things and individualize. I was going to look here at questions real quickly too and see how we're doing. So Holly had asked, will only current or active FCS charts be pulled, or could any chart that has been enrolled in FCS be pulled? What we hope for, and what the review letter says, is if you have less than 10 folks, you know, however many charts you've got, we look at 10 charts. So we look at a representative sample. It is good if they are open with the program. They can also be people, and in fact we encourage including a person or two in the charts that maybe a cease to show up, because we want to look at how you're doing with your assertive engagement. If somebody is no longer showing up to appointments, what kind of effort are you putting into kind of getting them back in again? So that's one of the things that we look at. Jennifer says this seems to be very different from HCA Supportive Housing Fidelity Review. Are you saying we need to be available for all 8 hours? For supportive housing, it worked out to only 3 hours total each day with separate meeting times. It is very different than supportive housing. Individual placement and support was developed by Dartmouth University and then purchased by Westat. It's an evidence-based practice, which is supportive housing as well. But it's an evidence-based practice that was developed in kind of a research setting. And so it is, there's a lot more documentation that goes on with IPS. There's a lot more in the way of, well, as an example, the manual that I attached is well over 100 pages long, very systematized in regards to what we do and how we do it. We have an expectation that someone, perhaps the IPS supervisor, is available to us throughout the day, but that could be via text, that could be via email, it could be whatever. You don't necessarily have to sit in the meetings the whole time, and in fact, you're not going to get to sit in the meeting the whole time. Any other people that are interviewed are only in for the length of time that they're interviewed. But some one person or two, perhaps the IPS supervisor and an information technology person, should be available at least via text or email so that we can catch up with them if we have a problem. As an example, with participants, it's pretty common that when we do the participant interview, someone has problems getting in, or someone is running late, and the IPS supervisor or someone checks with them to find out, are you having difficulties? How can I help you get into the meeting? And so we do need to have a person that's going to be available to us so we can do troubleshooting, is essentially what it is. But your observation is absolutely right. It's very different from supportive housing. The other thing that IPS does, and you could see from the sample letter, is the IPS review is typically set up in 2 days. I know the supportive housing reviews have been set up for, a period of time over several days. We typically get it done in 2 days, with some of the outlying interviews where if somebody had to cancel, we can set it up some other day, just given the fact that we collaborate with each other to do that. So hopefully that answers your question, Jennifer.
Great information, Dawn, and great question, Jennifer.
Activities. So some of the activities include things like observing a behavioral health team meeting, and that's assuming that the agency is a behavioral health agency. If it is not, then then it's a meeting with outside providers. So let's say that a lot of your referrals come from one specific group home or adult family home, then potentially we'd expect to see a meeting with them. Let's say, and I've worked with agencies where they did a lot of work with Department of Corrections, and so they had a periodic meeting with Department of Corrections to kind of go over the whole caseload and all the people that have been referred by them. So the intent is really, who's referring to you? Do you meet and collaborate with them? It might be internal if you're, say you have a supportive housing program and most of your referrals come from them, then the expectation would be that you'd have a meeting with the supportive housing team. So kind of consider where your referrals are coming from, and that sort of drives who then would be expected to be in a meeting with you, a periodic meeting with you. We also do an observation of the Supported Employment Unit meeting. When these are face-to-face, and one of the toughest things to do is the observation of job development by the employment specialist. When they're face-to-face, we have 90 minutes that we actually go out with the employment specialist and watch them talking to employers and see how they do their employer outreach. We obviously can't do that if it's virtual. And so what we have been doing are role plays. And in so doing, one of the review team members ends up being the employer. The employment specialist, we encourage them to think about a person on their caseload. So have a person in mind, because it makes it easier to do the role play, and then share with us. We're going to Les Schwab, or we're going to ABC Widget, or we're going to whatever, so that the team member that's playing the employer can prepare in their head for, how am I going to answer the questions and make it a little more realistic. The other alternative there, and something that I've seen done a couple of times, is if the employment specialist has a really great relationship with an employer, potentially we work out a meeting with that employer and the employment specialist, and we listen to their interaction, and the employment specialist would talk to the employer as they would normally do if they're going out to do a contact with them. So that's another alternative. We would just need to know which alternative is going to be used. And then one of the other activities is the chart review. And Mr. SME is there because the hope is that you will have your SME related to the chart review available to us during that time period, so that if we're having a difficulty finding something, that person can say you'll find it here or there or wherever it might be. I always say this is an open book test. We want you to succeed. We want you to do as well as you can possibly do. And so this kind of relates back to the question too. During the chart review process, we really would want whoever's going to be that SME, subject matter expert, or you know, the person that's going to help us most to say, when you're looking for this information, here's where you're going to find it.
Hey, Don, I just wanted,
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add that it's the agencies that are selecting the charts and the individuals that we're going to be reviewing. So it is up to the team to decide which materials that we're going to look at and review.
Good point. Well, and that, you know, that being said, you can choose the cream of the crop. I mean, you can choose the folks that you think really best represent all the good work that you've been doing. So that's kind of relief usually for agencies as well. The cursor doesn't seem to want to be working. There we go, it worked anyway. Darren, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Don. This is just, you know, a list of the critical elements and information we want to look at and learn about the agency through all of these multiple reviews. Definitely for behavioral health organizations that have incorporated a medical director and psychiatrists and providers, we're going to want to access some of that. Some agencies contract out for those services, and I've been able to, you know, be able to interview those providers outside the usual schedule to get those impressions and learn about what the psychiatrist knows about how the agency is organized and runs, if they have an employment program, how supportive employment program really can benefit people through, you know, the IPS model. So we're just learning from all these different perspectives of people's firsthand information, as well as what is the culture of the organization sharing. Maybe it's from onboarding, maybe it's from monthly, quarterly meetings with the executive team. How is the messaging coming out from different departments, and how is that shared? We also want to see that inner connection with the case managers and the therapists and the supportive employment specialists. Being a supportive employment specialist at one time and being a manager, there's so many people that we come in contact with to really build that network of support just internally, even before externally going out and making relationships with employers. So we really want to know how that is working, where the points of contact, where shared information is, and is that information being documented? I'm definitely old school in terms of if it's not documented, it never happened. And we can, at times during reviews, we really hear robust information and story sharing, but we don't always see that in the documentation. So that's something that we spend a lot of time during the chart review, is matching up things that are happening, things we hear or learn during the observations of the meetings for the behavioral health and the employment specialists, and then seeing how that matches up. It's a very complicated task, and I know all staff are extremely burdened with productivity and outcomes and time management, but those are some of the themes that we look for and the threads that we look for that connect all the different players and support people during that. And that also includes family members, you know, if that's a natural support, or maybe an employer is a natural support, or DVR, or a work source, ESD, all those parties can also be part of that. We're not interviewing them during this part, but there's that flexibility that we could add that if that's a primary partner that you're getting referrals from. And we want to meet the employment specialist, one of the most critical elements of this process, as well as talking to the employment supervisor or manager, learning how that role works. Last year I had some programs where there was only one staff, and that staff wore multiple hats. They were the employment specialist, and they were running and developing the program. And I thought it was pretty exciting that that agency actually wanted us to come in and do a review so that she could use that as a quality assurance tool to promote within the executive team changes and how we need to align with the IPS model. So that just kind of goes back to that quality improvement model that we really want to emphasize and grow throughout all the agencies. I know it's really hard at times to get all the executive team together, but I think this is such a crucial element because we really learn about the culture and the philosophy of the agency and how the IPS manager is interacting, sharing data, sharing success stories, all those really rich things that can really make the culture flow and be very successful. Hopefully part of this, for some agencies, you also have certified peer counselors or individuals in that peer counselor role. We really like to interact and hear their perspective as they're working with helping people change lives in the community, as well as some of the substance abuse staff can be integrated into those interviews depending on the focus and the time availability for folks. I know not everybody has a benefit planner. We look for that. Even if you're contracting outside your agency, we can set up a time to do that. I actually had one agency, it was pretty impressive, that during COVID, a lot of people have changed jobs, that this person had left the agency, went to work somewhere else, but she made time during her lunch to do an interview to support the agency that she left. So definitely shows a great level of commitment and some of the struggles that go on in terms of the challenges to meet all these elements of fidelity. Just like everything else, there's a lot of change going on. And definitely we want to be flexible and get as much information we can in a very restricted time frame. Even with DVR counselors, their schedule may not always coincide with what we're doing on the review. So definitely I've set up separate times just so that we can meet and do an interview with that provider. So definitely there's a lot of time and a lot of interview time, and review teams are taking a tremendous amount of notes during all these meetings. And we say that when you hear some silence, it doesn't mean, hopefully it doesn't mean we're having technical issues, but we're just trying to take really good, robust notes so that we can bring all that information together to really reflect all the great things that an agency is doing. Over to you, Dawn.
All righty. Oh, there we go. Gonna say there goes the delay in slide changing, but it did. So there is a fair amount of paperwork, if you will. It's not paper, it's electronic, it's whatever, but the kinds of things that we're going to want to look at data-wise include job development logs. So whatever it is that your employment specialists use to log their employer contacts, that's one of the things that we're going to want to see. I know some agencies have adopted kind of a unified system where they all the employment specialists enter information about employer contacts in one log. Other agencies, the employment specialists do their own log. Whatever it is that you've got, that's what we're going to hope to see. And we would hope that it would have on it at the very least date. What employer they've gone to, is it the hiring manager that they talk to, kind of what's the follow-up, what are they going to do after that. You know, kind of at a minimum we would want those kinds of things. We do have samples of a log that everybody can use if you have an interest in seeing that. We can either provide it to you in advance of the review or when we're done, whatever works. So we're going to want a list of places where people are employed and the list of names of folks that are employed, because we're going to match it back to chart reviews. Some of the chart reviews that we do need to be of individuals that are employed so that we can see what kind of follow-along support to provide. So that list of places where people are employed has to include the employer name, the job title, start dates, name of business. It's also nice if you have wage. One of the tests in the fidelity review is the job competitive? And when IPS defines competitive, it's a job that anybody can apply for, paying at least a minimum wage. And then there's some other parameters related to that, but that's where the wage thing would come in. If you have supervisor notes, team meeting notes, things along that line, it's helpful if you provide us with a sample of those. Field mentoring logs. One of the IPS principles talks about the supervisor should do field mentoring. So they should go out with the employment specialist into the field and help to provide feedback in relationship to how they're interacting with the individual, but also in the case of job development, how they're doing with job development. You know, are there suggestions that the supervisor can make to improve upon their employer outreach contacts? I mentioned earlier, pictures of postings and brochures in the lobby or waiting area, with the intent that hopefully those things show up so that people can self-refer. If you have a continuous quality improvement, a QA process, that kind of thing within your agency, we'd like to see how supported employment is included in that QA report. It doesn't necessarily have to be the whole report, but it does need to be the segment that relates to the supported employment or IPS program. We also would like to see, if you've been through a review and done an action plan, a copy of that action plan for what you intend to do from one review to the next in order to make some changes. And then we'd like to see staff logs, which ends up being, staff logs or staff calendars, ends up being one of the hardest things for agencies to provide to us. What we're looking for is something, and very often it could even be a calendar page, but hopefully if there are documented appointments in it, it will say in the community or in the office or at the individual's home, or wording to that effect so that we know where it occurred. And right now, obviously with COVID, most of them are going to be either in office or virtual. But we want to see the time duration, so the start and end time, and the location for each of those items throughout, 2 weeks full of a 2-week period in order to do the assessment of how much time is spent out in the community, when you can spend time in the community again. That, for whatever reason, that ends up being the providing of the staff calendar or staff logs ends up being the hardest thing for agencies to do. So if you have questions about that, now is really a great time to discuss them, because it's not just a single agency problem. It really truly has been pretty much every agency that we've reviewed has the most difficult time with that.
Hey, Don, I just wanted to add, definitely one of the challenges that we face looking through information about all the great work that you're doing, that there's a lot of rigidity to the IPS, the 24 elements, and there isn't really that COVID understanding when we look at the model. A lot of things that IPS looks at, we still look at what was happening, prior to COVID and doing that. And we understand that. And we really want people to, really focus on so many other, the robust elements of IPS. And it's okay, from my perspective, as people are organizing and we're all going through these critical changes, to focus on all the great things that you're doing. And as we know, when we finally get through vaccination, I guess we're just starting now, and probably end of this year, next year, that we'll be able to kind of work more with agencies increasing those community times. But I have seen a lot of creative people in terms of going to people's homes, talking through the windows, or meeting in parks to kind of meet some of those standards. This is kind of a very short list of all the resources that Don and I work with and share. So there's a lot of information on pathways to employment. There's some great tracking tools for Excel spreadsheets to track a client caseloads, employer, job placements, all those great robust things that we love to look at in an organized fashion, as well as a benefit estimator, because we know not everybody has that ability, but you can set up an account on Pathways to Employment and work with a benefit estimator just to give somebody some education about how their benefits would change, and then print that off and put it in your chart. And that is going to meet some of the requirements in terms of documenting that ongoing education and reporting of wages, which is critical for a lot of our all the clients that you work with. So definitely a lot of resources on the resource page under Supported Employment, and a lot of the tabs there as well. One thing we forgot to add was probably the FCS. So hopefully everybody is also on the FCS newsletter that comes out monthly. We also have a Supported Employment wiki that Don has been spending a lot of time with that. I'm just getting orientated now, but there are some great references and information that we share where the community can do some posting and sharing of information. So that's another access as we're expanding our learning community and participation in that. And then the gold standard is the IPS Works org, where you have a ton of information, a lot of stuff in their library to access, trainings that are available, and I think they added some new video components too for training. So definitely a lot of information, as well as the certification series that they have for training to elevate staff to a higher level of understanding and implementing the IPS modality of supported employment services.
So the two handouts that are attached to the webinar, one of them is the manual that I mentioned, the other one is the PowerPoint, and I believe that we put in active links on the Supported Employment resource page, so you should be able to just click on it and be able to access the three that have active links in them that way. I'm going to look at questions here. In fact, I think that's the next slide that we've got is, do you have questions? If I could get the slides. There we go. So I see we actually have quite a few questions since then. Holly asked, will golden thread be looked at during this review? That's something that's brought up in many of the FCS webinars, et cetera. Golden thread is not looked at specifically, but some of the principles of golden thread are very important. So if we're looking at progress notes and the information that is being worked on is not connected to a care plan, we may comment on the fact that, the care plan, or what we would refer to as a job support plan, job search plan, those kinds of things, that, you need to make certain that shows up in the job support or job search plan or the care plan. So if we're seeing things that are being worked on that are not relevant to employment, one of the principles talks about the fact that 94% of the time that individuals, supported employment specialists spend, or is it 96? Now I'm spacing on that, sorry about that. But the greater majority of the time that a supported employment specialist spends needs to be on supported employment. So golden thread's not addressed specifically, but some of the same aspects that are part of golden thread are things that we would look at because of fidelity principles. That's a great question. Jennifer, it says, what if a program has started since COVID and you're just building it up and growing it internally? Then it's an ideal time for a fidelity review, because what it provides is feedback related to how you're doing and things that you might still want to consider working on. Really, the bottom line of a fidelity review is just that. It's continuous quality improvement. It's to give you feedback. It's to help and support you. And so I know, because I've been on the other side of the table and I've been in an agency that was reviewed, agencies, staff are nervous when a fidelity reviewer comes in. I think as the process goes along, they become less so, because I know both Darren and I and all review team members try and keep it friendly and helpful, and that's what it's really intended to be. So that baseline fidelity review is going to be a snapshot at that point in time with some recommendations in regards to things that you could potentially do differently, and your agency gets to choose which ones they actually follow through with. But it also is going to give you some kudos for the things that you're doing well. We all need that. So you're going to get some feedback about great job on this or that, and we like what we've seen here or there. So hopefully it ends up being something that helps you do future planning for things you might want to add to. And Holly says, and similarly, before I assume will only the FCS clients be looked at in the job logs? Yes. Meaning those 6 contacts have to be just FCS, or will 6 for any SE client be accepted? So with employer outreach and with the logs related to that, I guess my question would be, when you're doing employer outreach, you're building relationships with employers, and do those relationships get used for the FCS? That sounded bad, I'm sorry. Do the relationships end up helping, sorry, when you're then trying to place an FCS participant in one of those jobs? I guess it's probably in my mind, and Darren, feel free to chime in on that one, less of an issue in my mind that you say specifically this is FCS or specifically this is some other program. If it's building an employer relationship, it's building an employer relationship. And as long as that may benefit the folks in the FCS program, I guess I'm not as concerned about that. But having said that, we're looking at counting the numbers of employer contacts that the FCS specialist does. And so if it's other staff, staff other than FCS employment specialist, we don't want to see those. Does that help? And Darren, please feel free to chime in too.
Well, I think that's a good culture piece, that we want people to know what the employment specialist is doing and build some of those partnerships. But the rigidity of the IPS model is that we're looking for those 6 contacts, and we know that's going to ebb and flow with all the factors that are going on right now. But it's pretty prescribed. We're looking for that. But some of those, we want to see documentation. I do, that people are in the community, maybe having contact with family, other providers, all those kind of things that build that network to really support the individual on their journey. Because some of that could be supportive education or entering into some training program in that capacity as well. And those are kind of all those robust things that build up for the data, that we look at.
Okay. Yeah, the 6 specifically, and I'm thinking, Holly, you're referring to the employer outreach, 6 employer outreach contacts a week, and that would be on a log. And what Darren's talking about is also incredibly helpful and typically would show up in progress notes. Are you talking with family? Are you talking with persons in college? Are you doing supported education and maybe helping them to gain accommodation so that they can succeed in their classes? And are those things documented? So it's really a kind of a total picture kind of a thing that we're looking at. LP says, I'm a new client who doesn't want benefits planning. He said he knows what to do and doesn't want help with that. Would I just document his request? Absolutely. Just about everything that's done related to IPS is choice related, if it has the individual as a piece of it. And so if that's his choice, that's his choice. Definitely document in the progress notes.
But hopefully, LP, we would also see that you are talking about this, as the closer gets to a job, or maybe that you're aware of he has some benefits that might be impacted. So that discussion just doesn't stop. That can come up again as you make progress towards whatever their client-centered goal is.
Really good point. Dan says, can you remind me where to get the PowerPoint? If you look at the list of options that show up for the webinar, down towards the bottom of the list, it says handouts 2 of 5. And if you expand that, so click on the triangle and expand it down, there's the manual and then the PowerPoint that are part of that. If for some reason that doesn't work, let me know and I'll send them out with an email after the fact. I'm going to go ahead and for the last little bit, I am going to try and unmute everybody. We've got like 6 minutes left, it looks like. And so I'm going to try and unmute everybody. Let's see here. All right, so at least from what it says, you can unmute yourself now and be able to talk. If anybody has any questions they would like to ask verbally, please feel free to unmute yourself at this point in time and ask those questions. Or if you're more comfortable, you can still continue using the chat box in order to ask your questions. Okay, it says I'm muted by the organizer. I unmuted. Yes, attendees will have full control and can unmute themselves at any time. So, Elke, if you look at the attendee list and there's a red microphone, if you click on that red microphone and unmute yourself, you should be able to talk. If not, then I'll do it individually. I will mention that part of the process of the fidelity review is okay, and Dan says it shows 2 handouts.
I have emailed Mr. Fox those documents and CC'd you and Darren.
See, I told you it was awesome, Austin.
I second that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, the bottom of the 2 handouts is actually the PowerPoint. That doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's going to have equal access and be able to get it open, because we know what technology's like. Pick and choose. So part of the process of the fidelity review is at the end of things we will do, the fidelity review team will do consensus scoring after we've had a chance to do all the interviews and activities. We then write a report, and in the report you have scores, you have recommendations, and you have kudos related to things that you've done well. It takes a month or maybe a little more, depending upon how things go, to get that report written and back. Well, okay. I was trying to be positive there. When we did consensus scoring, we also assigned to the different review team members pieces of the report to write. The lead reviewer, so Darren or I, have to compile the report, get it in an order where everybody can read it, and then send it back out, send the draft back out to the team for their additional editing. And then once it's finalized, get it out to you. So a month or a little more. And then the process after that is, once your agency's had a chance to look at it and decide on the things they might want to take on as far as the change, then typically agencies will write up an action plan, or at the very least they'll have that meeting related to what it is that they're doing. So when we come up for a follow-up review, because reviews are put together as a baseline. If you've never had one before, you have a baseline to see where you're at that moment in time. And then probably a year later, based on the way we've been doing things, you're offered the opportunity to do a follow-up review so that you can compare and see what kind of positive changes you've made. So that's an option that's available to you as well. So that's kind of the beginning to end process of fidelity reviews. Baseline, you get the report, you do the action plan, you have a follow-up, a year later or something along that line. One of the other things that's always available to you is Darren and I and our team are available to do training, either individualized or in a group. Very often, if we hear that there's enough of the same question, we will do, set up a group virtual training. And so that's something that's available to agencies at any given time. Sometimes agencies will take their fidelity report, and if it's something they feel like they want training from us on, that's an item that they scored lower in, we can set up training to address that kind of thing too. Darren mentioned the wiki, the Supported Employment Wiki. It has a lot of the recordings or PowerPoints, excuse me, not recordings, a lot of the PowerPoints from prior trainings posted on the wiki. So if there are those kinds of things you'd like to see, they're available. And then more recently, our communications department has been making some of the recordings for the webinars into YouTube videos. And I just found out that it's easier for them to do with GoToWebinar than even the Zoom. So I'm going to be getting those to the communications department in order to turn our recordings into YouTube videos as appropriate. All right. So are there any other questions? Has this been helpful? I guess what we're hoping is that any of you that still want to do a one-to-one call after this to answer additional questions about your upcoming fidelity review, we're happy to schedule that. We're hoping, and I see Dan says helpful, yes, good. I'm glad to hear that. We're hoping that this piece of things will allow you maybe a little more time to do some preparation than maybe it's been done in the past, because usually we set up those meetings you know, a couple, 3-4 weeks in advance of the review, and you know, this in some cases is probably 2 or 3 months out for you guys, so that you have more time to do your planning and things. So hopefully this has been helpful. Do feel free to send us a critique. If there are things that we could do differently, we'd love to hear that. This will be our own little fidelity review. You can review us. Here's your chance. So do please provide us with that feedback. We always want to do our best, and if there are ways we can improve upon this, we'd like to do so. From my standpoint, thank you so very much for attending today. Truly appreciate it. Thanks for all your excellent questions, because you did ask some very, very good questions.
Yeah, thank you all for your questions and participation today. We really appreciate it.
So if there are no other questions, then we will end at this point in time. Have a marvelous day. Stay safe.
Take care, everybody. Stay safe.